Well, Daniel, thank you so much for making time to share your insights into the future of leadership. But before we go into leadership, can you tell us a little bit more about your own background? Where did you grow up?
Grew up actually in two provinces, in the Eastern Cape and in the Western Cape. So long to short, I think by the time I was aware of life and things, I was living in Cape Town, right? I'm a son of a former MK, who then ran his own businesses, etc. And my first entrepreneurial experience was my dad used to own we call it Bioscope in South Africa. The rest of the world is cinema, is theater, right? So my dad would charge people or the kids in our community to come watch specific VHS movies at home. So you charge them either 50 cents or 10 cents. So literally our living room during some days you'll have like 50 or 100 kids just sitting down and watching movies at home, and they would all start watching. Right.
Those must have been the days of VHS.
Yeah, those are the days of VHS. So for me, I think that's when the entrepreneurial or mindset was kind of sparked. Yes, there was a spaza shop at home. There was a tavern at home as well. So sometimes I would then start selling at the tuck shop, right? So I think that's when I started like, okay, cool, this is money. This is what you do with money. This is how you count, etc., etc.
So what was your dream career as you grew up?
It's funny enough that you actually said so, right? So we all know of Zulu, right? So in the early 90s, late 80s, there was a depiction of Shaka Zulu in this mini series. I think it's a 10-part series where boom, 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 boom. Right. We are growing higher and higher, right? I remember every Saturday or Sunday, I would watch it, and as soon as it stops, I would be so inspired. And at this time, I was 6'7". 6'7", I would then walk bare-chested, go to the nearest hill in Ekailicha, Cape Town, where I grew up, Emakaya. I would run to the nearest hill, and then I would play fight and pretend as if I'm holding a spear, just like Ushaka does in the actual series, where in the opening shot of the trailer, or I don't know what you call it, but that's exactly what I would do. I honestly wanted, not conquering in a way, but I wanted to be an owner.
So you're talking about the scene where he just invented the Ikhwa.
Yeah, like boom, 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 boom,
the mountain.
Boom, 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 boom. That scene for me, I think, I'm even getting goosebumps now. So for me, that scene and what was happening around my life at that time, which was cinema, media, everything was not being on top of your game, but like writing your own narrative, being the controller, being the lion of your own story. And that's one thing that Ushaka always did. And like, he had a lot of advisors, but if he didn't agree with what the advisors are saying, I'm like, okay, cool, stuff you. And that's one thing that I appreciate from that time of my life and with Shaka Zulu.
So Daniel, who else inspired you in those early days?
Parents, definitely. Like the ability to wake up and grind for your children, that definitely inspires me. I essentially was a nerd, right? So I was one of those kids that. So I grew up in a strict household. So I was one of those kids that when the rest of the children are going on semester break, I would be studying. So by the time school starts, I've already finished that chapter. I've already finished that syllabus for that specific term. I don't know, we had a lot of encyclopedias. So Einstein would come up. I started reading a lot of Einstein, Beethoven, Mozart, playing chess, etc. So my parents and philosophical leaders, I would think so. Yeah.
So definitely. Where did you start your career?
Which one? It's been a 13 to 14 year career. I've dropped out of medicine school. I've then through UCT studied business, owned billboards. I've ran my internship through YNR advertising. I think when it was still in Cape Town. I'm not sure if they're still open at the moment.
Right.
But yeah. So it's been a 13-14 year long journey, and I would say it's been, I wouldn't say your typical entrepreneurial journey, but I was what Buddhists would say you were becoming. So I was becoming Daniel.
Now, recently you were awarded as one of the top 100 disruptors in Mzansi. Can you tell us a little bit more about that prestigious award and what you were awarded for?
Yeah, okay, so you found that out. That's good. Somebody nominated me, because for those competitions, not just one person, like a few people need to nominate you, and then obviously they benchmark you somehow, I don't know, through the matrix. But it was an honor to actually, like, when you are being vetted by your peers that you don't even know, that are vetting you out at that specific time or year or years, or they just keeping track of your traction throughout your career, right? It's heartfelt. Like you can't not stop and say, whew, okay, I'm doing something somehow. You know what I mean? Because us as entrepreneurs, I would like to believe that we always, like, we work in a very recluse, like inclusive kind of way within our brain. So we kind of lock out the world, you know, so we're not aware of who's watching and how and why they're watching, because we're living in this bubble. So getting that award was actually a testimony that, okay, cool, you are doing something that the greater society is actually saying kudos, Daniel, to that. So it was a good one. Thank you to all the people that actually voted for me or nominated me.
So Daniel, looking back over your career so far, would you say there was a major turning point where things could have gone different, but you took a decision to take the next step this way?
2013. Yeah, 2013, when my son passed away. Yeah, my 4-year-old son passed away. So things could have definitely, well, things did. Let me not say could have. Things did actually shift the other direction. Do you know when people say that my blood has alcohol? My alcohol had blood in it. That's how bad my drinking was at that time. I found solace in just staying numb, drinking. And remind you, at that time, I'm already heading this company, right? So, but because I would say mostly, of course, I was in denial, you know. But after a year, after counseling, I was like, I told myself, you know what? You now need to do it for your son's legacy. So now, if it's going to end up in, oh, daddy was a drunkard after, that's not, because essentially the business was built for him. It was a legacy for my son, right? So when that happened, I took a sabbatical of alcohol for like a year. Not of alcohol, with alcohol for a year, and then, thanks God, I just snapped back to my senses. So it could have. It did.
So Daniel, what is driving you today?
It's that purpose, it's that legacy. It has obviously now grown into media ownership, where I really want Africa to own its own narrative, and not just own its own narrative, to also reshape that narrative. Because remember, the conquerors are the ones that always write the story of the conquering, which is a bit unfair. Like, who's writing the story of the conquered? You know, and that's exactly what you see in the African historical landscape, is that the stories about us, Africa, has always been written by outsiders, the conquerors. You know what I mean? And it's a bit unfair. It's not even unfair. It defeats logic. Like that's not. It's illogical. You know what I mean? So for me, the things that drive me is sticking to my son's legacy. Is that purpose has got to do with Africa owning itself, and I want to be one of the forerunners. People where people in the next 50 or 100 years can say, hey, there was Daniel. You know what I mean? So yeah.
Now, Daniel, let's talk about leadership. And I know it's a big question, but what does the future of leadership mean to you?
And to some degree, okay, so disclaimer, to some degree, it goes against the leadership that we are taught by your Western schools of thought. For example, micromanaging. For example, you need to be ruthless to get the best out of your employees. That doesn't work anymore. Leaders need to have EQ more than IQ to some degree. You know what I mean? It's interesting that a few accountancy firms around the world, like for example Ernst & Young. Ernst & Young has recently come out to say that a degree is no longer the benchmark of them entering new people for employment. You know, so the world of employment, which then is also tied into leadership, is exactly that. It's more fluid now. And especially if people are running like media marketing companies, there are people who are natural sellers out there. They don't have PhDs or masters or degrees when it comes to business, the formal way of selling things. And you'll actually find out that those guys because they don't do things by the book, they're able to adapt to any landscape on earth. You know what I mean? So it's quite fluid. It's minus things such as your micromanaging people, having this complete Western way of leading people. It's got to do with the heart. It must be intuitive. It must be being able to fire your best salesperson because he or she is making the rest of the team feel like crap. So you need to take it on the chin that this person is bringing me whatever amount of revenue, but if they're not adding to the culture, of your firm, you should let them go, because there's no I in team, and what you are doing essentially is building a team, and you are the head of that team. You are the guider of that culture, because when anything goes wrong in a business, people are not going to look at that number one performing salesperson who's making everybody feel bad. They're going to look at you, because the buck, unfortunately, when you're an owner, the buck starts and ends with you, right? So it's got to do with not going too much into Western understanding of what leadership is. It's got to do with not allowing yourself as an owner, as the leader, to micromanage people. And thirdly, it's got to do with what I just spoke about now, which is take ownership. Everything is on you as the owner. You know, a lot of people have got this where they confuse leadership and management. So management on the side must push people, all of that. Unfortunately, when you are a leader, you must also play the part of being a parent. You have to nurture, guide, be soft, be hard, be firm, etc. All those things. A manager, not really. Like, we're here to do a job, Unfortunately, when you're building something like legacy, you have to play the role of the parent.
And Daniel, what have you learned from your own journey that you consider most important for building future leaders?
one, you don't know everything as a leader, and secondly is tenacity. You have to keep at it. Like every day, you're gonna fall 1,000 times. However, you need to wake up 1,500 times. You have to. And for me, I will always like to, whenever I get a question like this, when you're standing up still now, right? And then somebody pushes you for you to fall. You've got two decisions. Either you fall backwards or you fall forward. However, when you fall forward, you still, you fail. Not failed, you have fallen. But you fell forward. So now your head is no longer where it was essentially. It's further. You have fallen, but you've experienced. You've gained so much knowledge. So you've fallen forward. You need to get up, but back in that same position that your head was. That's the trials and tribulations of leadership. Falling forward, not backwards.
Now, Daniel, when it comes to social media, what is it that you advise future leaders they should focus on, or how should they handle social media to build their own brand, their personal brand?
From the event that I was telling you about earlier on about Africa's best 100 brands, right? There's one question that actually came up, which is quite similar to what you're asking me, is that is the brand responsible for pushing the brand, his or her firm? For me, I think the consensus, or the speaker that was speaking at that time, said that it had no impact on it. For me, I would actually differ.
It's crazy.
I know, right? For me, I actually differ. That's why there's one thing that I always protect, and that's my personal brand, right? There's one thing I don't want anything coming in between. That is my personal brand, because when you take the likes of your Richard Branson, right? He has managed to, at that time, in the 80s or 70s, 80s when he came up, people essentially didn't know about him, but he made sure that he builds his personal brand as this daredevil, as this entertaining person, as this entrepreneur, as this pusher of life. He was living his best life essentially. So people got attracted to that, right? And that's part and parcel of why Virgin, the company Virgin Group, took off. So for me, it's tied. So people, entrepreneurs or future leaders, they have to, number one, be aware of what they put out to the world on social media. Be aware of it. Of course, you can be, add some spice here and there, but be aware of it. You don't want something to come back to you when you're running for presidency or governor in the next 20 years or 30 years because, you were living your best life. So try to tone it down. For example, I get those moments too, where I tap, and I leave it there. And then I woosa myself. And then I just backspace.
Backspace.
And then I backspace. So I type out, I promise you, I'm a furious typer. And then I backspace. You know what I mean? So, for example, I backspaced just last week when Helen Ziller mentioned that white privilege doesn't exist. And I was like, oh! And I went in. After that, I was like, it's not worth it. It's okay. Let her play in her field. I'm changing Africa. I'm changing the world. Clearly, she wants to live in the past. She doesn't want to see a united Africa. She doesn't want to see all races and creed being under one boardroom and saying, hey, Nick, how was your day? Oh, wunderbar. She doesn't want that. Let's live in the past according to her. And I'm saying that, no, that doesn't work. I don't want my kids to live in a society like that. I want my kids, when they look at a Chinese, an Indian, or white person, to say, hey, but that's my equal. Hey, I can actually hang around with those people. She doesn't want that. So yeah, that's my grab on that.
You decided to stay on your mission.
Yeah. And that's it. That's part of the hardest things. as entrepreneur, because we've got our views about things, we've got our opinions about things, but you need to decide, are you playing the long game or the short game? I'm playing the long game. For example, Uhuru, okay, so I've been in business for, as I said, past 13, 14 years, but Uhuru has only been around for what, 4 years. In the greater scheme of things, that's a very short time. It took Apple like 20 years to reach the magnitude where it did, where today Apple is the number one brand on earth. It's the most valued brand on earth. 20 years. What is 4 years? You know what I mean? So I'm playing that game. I know for all the successes that we've had in the past 4 years is not compared to as the success we'll have in the next 30 years. I'll still be fairly young in the next 30 years.
Actually, a very good point. I think Apple, Steve Jobs started probably mid-70s.
Exactly.
And then when he came back, Apple almost failed 20 years later.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
You know, so it's got to do with some of the advice that I would give future leaders. Your life or what you should do. Focus on your personal brand. Focus on your personal brand. Of course, focus on your business's brand, but build your personal brand. I remember when I had dreadlocks about 2010. Around 2010. Still owning Isidima Brands, our brand communications firm. I remember going to pitch, right? And whenever I would go in, the client or the accounts manager or the marketing director or whoever, the brand manager, they would always ask me, oh, so where's the manager? Like, where's the boss? Kind of question. And I'll be like, but I'm the boss. But I was not playing the part of the boss. Unfortunately, we live in a very superficial world. Dress in a suit, etiquette, etc., etc. So I had to learn those things. I didn't know that you need to see yourself in the next 50, in the next 30 years. Project yourself in the next 30 to 50 years. See what are those characteristics of that person, and try to employ those characteristics that do not require money. For example, good manners, dressing the part. And now I get it, a suit is not for everybody, but when you want to have a company which is valued at trillions and trillions, unfortunately, to some degree, there's some conformity that you do to some degree. So yeah.
Now, Daniel, as a mentor to future leaders, can you maybe share a success story or two where you mentored somebody and that person took your advice to heart?
Okay, so just a disclaimer. For number one, for me personally, I don't really believe in mentorship for me, right? Because I always go back to the first billionaires. They didn't have those mentors as we have in the traditional sense. We had our mothers, we had our fathers, you know? So however, the people that I would say that I bounce ideas off, they usually use them. Like, I've got a friend of mine right now that after us sitting down, like he was based in Bern, Switzerland, is now in Munich, if I'm not mistaken, right? So I don't have anyone that I've actually mentored, because I find it hard, and just going back to myself and mentorship, I find it quite hard to mentor somebody else while I'm still trying to discover this life thing. You know, and I think I'm just winging this life thing. I think I'll be winging for the next 50 years. You know, so for me, there's no specific occasion where I can say I gave that person advice and it flourished. I feel that kind of adds to ego. For example, my sister, I started telling my sister to actually to volunteer at the nearest library at our home, right? She's now 22. However, she's got plus minus 12 years working experience. And you ask yourself, how? I drove her to it. I said, go do that, because I had already started working. So I knew the importance of having work experience. She started doing it when she was 9, 10, right? And that's one thing that a lot of people don't get, that you might not be getting paid because it's volunteerism, right? However, you are gaining that work experience. She's 22, 12 years working experience. It's crazy. So if I'm pushed, I would say that. And today she's working for one of South Africa's best events companies. She's actually an event producer right now. You know what I mean? So yeah, that's if I'm pushed, I would say that's one part where I actually played the role of a mentor, and then she just ran with it. Like, I remember teaching her the periodic table off by heart through in high school, right? And then she then decided to go do events management. But that's a similar thing with me. Medicine, and then look at me going into brand communication and now technology. You know what I mean? So I was angry, but it was a bit hypocritical because I actually did the same thing. And then she managed to do wonders with it. So yeah.
So Daniel, are there any role models of leadership that you would recommend future leaders should study or maybe learn from? Or books about leadership?
Yeah. The craziest thing that is, we currently live in a society where there's Google. You can literally today fall in love with a new sector, research the hell out of it for the next 2 or 3 days, and you'll become not a thought leader, but you'll like kind of a novice. Like, you'll know what you are talking about. You'll be able to have conversations if you want it bad enough. So for me, I won't say specific books per se, but you need to be hungry enough. You need to... There's one thing that I wish I had done earlier in my career, where before all the failing is, let's say you want to, in whatever sector that you want to own your own business, go into it, intern, go ask the CEO, hey, can I just follow you around for the next year? You don't need to pay me, right? However, you do need to be realistic enough because you've got bills. So you need to do something after 5 o'clock when you leave that job. And after a few months, most places will say, okay, this is slavery. We need to give this person some form of a stipend to some degree. You know what I mean? But I would say that try to get some internship of whatever. Try to get some internship in whatever sector that you would like. Unfortunately for me, when it came to media ownership, or even the company, the electronic side, I don't have that uncle who has done the same thing. I don't have that aunt or father or sister or even in my go-to circle where I can just go sit next to the CEO of MTN, Vodacom, or Samsung. Most of these people are in Asia or London somewhere, and here I was wanting to be the big guy, the owner of it. You know what I mean? So it's, for me, I've learned through trial and error. For other people, like, you are now in a space because of social media. All these people are within your grasp. You can literally tweet the CEO of Uhuru, and I'll get your tweet. Vodacom, Vodafone, Huawei. Did I mention Uhuru? Yeah.
Daniel, how can our listeners connect with you, and where should they follow you?
Oh, okay. On social media, that's one of the best ways. Social media, personally, on LinkedIn, it's Daniel Thebe, which is Daniel Thebe, Thebe. That's my LinkedIn handle.
Right.
And then on Twitter, it's #thatbrandguy. Yes, I know.
That's nice.
#thatbrandguy, as it is that brand guy, or you can just search Daniel Thebe. So one of the two, Daniel Thebe or #thatbrandguy. And on Facebook, it's Daniel Katleho Thebe. So I'll spell that. It's DanielKatlehoThebe. Oh my God, I got it.
There we go.
Daniel Katleho Thebe. And when it comes to the company, it's on Instagram. On Instagram, it's Uhuru Viva, all one word. Uhuru Viva, which is UHURUVIVA. Uhuru Viva. On Facebook, for the company, it's Uhuru. So you just search Uhuru. It will come up. The lady is holding a phone. It will be us, and our logo is a U with a star on it. And there's exactly the same thing on Twitter as well.
Now, Daniel, last but not least, is there one piece of advice that you would really like to convey to future leaders that they should implement in their own lives?
Fall on your own sword. That's one thing I would say. There's a reason why companies such as your Kodaks, such as your Green Foods in the US have fallen, or BlackBerry have fallen, is people don't want to innovate. They don't want to pivot, essentially. I'm like, BlackBerry has now become a software company, essentially now. Just leasing out their software. And this was once upon, not even, when I say once upon, it sounds like I'm talking like 20 years ago. It's just literally like 6 years ago. Like literally 6 years ago, BlackBerry was the brand. It's no longer the brand right now. You know what I mean? It's crazy. So following your own sword, try to take yourself out of business every day. And what I mean by that is that let you be the one who comes up with these innovative offerings. Now, the advantage that future leaders have, as opposed to all these oligarchy, old businesses, those businesses are essentially mammoths. They are elephants. They're huge. The advantage that we have is that we are agile. We are cheetahs. You know, we are leopards. We are able to maneuver. What that means, as soon as you get an idea, you are able to implement it faster. With these companies, when an idea comes, it'll take 4 years for it to be implemented. So always fall on your own sword, because it's way better to fall on your own sword than somebody else's sword.
I like it.
Thank you.
Daniel, thank you so much for sharing your insights and your wisdom.
Thank you so much.
Into the future of leadership, and reminding us that we ought to fall on our own swords.
Definitely. Nick, thank you so much.